And looking at the dailies, you will see on the Daily Nation, the front page, talking about talking about pain and anguish of Matatu boycott after cat and mouse game with the authorities. PSV operators called off strike last evening, but not before taking Kenyans for a ride. Well, quite literally. Then you'll see that on the front page of the Standard, deal ends strike, relief expected to go back to normal. Or rather, things expected to go back to normal after public transport operators call off strike and apologize to commuters after reaching consensus with the government. But of course, the pictures on page 2 and 3 of the Standard will show you the situation as it was. You will see that some of the commuters are hanging on to the Nairobi commuter train. Boda riders having it rough with the authorities. And police officers yesterday seen quite in action, being the day that the crackdown was to be effected, the day that the enhancement or the enforcement of the traffic rules, as inspired by one John Mishuki the late. Do you think this is sustainable, having come from day one of the crackdown?
I think we have a culture that we need to change. We have a culture in Kenya where we respond to things and react to things, and then we don't have the ability to follow up. What Michuki began a number of years ago was a noble idea. And this day, or yesterday, many years when Michuki began this, I remember people walked for almost a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. People would collect themselves into groups and walk long distances from Dandora to Nairobi and back, and from Kibra, Westlands and the rest. And when finally that system came into place, we thought that this was the kind of sanity that we needed to organize our Matatu industry, our public transports, into some kind of discipline, so that the roguish behavior, because there's an issue of the behavior of the public transport operators. There is the unscrupulous part of it, which is the habits of picking people anywhere, the safety aspect of it in terms of exposing passengers to dangers by not putting seatbelts. And there is also the corruption part of it in terms of what role do the police play in the degeneration of our public transport area. So for us to have let all that time, energy, investments, and regulations to have lapsed was really a waste. And I think it is a big indictment on us as Kenyans. And this is the same thing, and that's what I was trying to say in Kitale the other day when I spoke to my president, Uhuru Kenyatta. You have come up with very good things about lifestyle audit. You have said, let's stop 2022 politics. But how capable are we as president and us as Kenyans to be able to follow through? And that's the story about the Matatu industry. So now we are back to square one. But imagine if this culture had been inculcated. And I want to give comparison from the countries that I have been in. I've been to Europe, I've been to America, and there is this thing that is just part of their culture. I remember in Netherlands, we were 6, 7 members of parliament. It's like 11 p.m. in the night outside the main city, and the lights are red. And we stood there, and we would not walk across until the lights went green. So if we can do that there, and that's a culture that they have put into their system, why can't we do it in Kenya? It's a real big indictment. Second thing is about why we have failed to invest in public transport. And again, the comparisons here are for me. Inside our CBD itself and going out, the European countries have invested a lot into this thing they call trams, public mass transport that actually have wires, electric wires wired across, and the trains come and they get charged, and people are able to move from point A to point B. And this actually intertwines and crisscrosses together with the buses and the other vehicles. When the lights go green for the trains will go and the buses will stop. So that if there is a crisis, if ever there was a crisis like this one, mass transport must always be there. There is no economy that runs and sustains itself by leaving the public transport purely and completely to private hands. Right. I think lastly on this issue, so that I give my friend a chance, is to say that as the national government focuses on our SGR and the train and the highway, the 6-lane highway they want to do from Mombasa and back, I think we must amend or allow our county governments within their jurisdictions to dedicate a certain amount of money to infrastructure and particularly public transport. I know there are classification of roads and things, but we should look at how can county government be compelled to invest in public transport so that we can be able to get out of this kind of mess.
Yes. And Dr. Chris, before I ask you about the public mass transport, the actions that you saw yesterday, the crackdown, the level that we saw on the roads in different cities of everyone, if you had not complied with the rules, your vehicles were impounded, including motorbikes and even private owners, some of those that tried to take advantage and cash in on some of the commuters who were traveling. Is it sustainable in the long term? Is it something that can be done every other day to ensure there's discipline on the roads, and that the vehicles that are on the roads are compliant with the rules?
To me, first of all, I was totally against the police brutality on this matter, and obviously it's not sustainable. You know, before you do anything, there's that issue of public participation, and in this case, you're calling upon the stakeholders. I think what Michuki should have done should have involved the critical stakeholders. I mean, no, sorry, Matiang'i. You know, Michuki is the Michuki rules.
But Matiang'i is not the CS Transport. CS Transport is
absolutely, but it's the one coming in the terms of implementation. And that's why initially I said, even people were asking, is he the CS Transport or where is he?
So who should do exactly what you're saying?
Michuki, by that time, he was the minister in charge of transport. So this is a docket that really involves Macharia. And one of the directives that CS Macharia gave was on the train transport, that they should increase the number of times they're moving and be able to reduce maybe their fare by about 10%. But when it comes to the critical implementation, this is the jurisdiction of CS Macharia. But we are seeing Matiang'i coming in. Actually, Matiang'i is like the Michuki. You know, if the style of leadership that Michuki was using, actually it converges with what Matiang'i is doing. But having said that, to me, I don't think it was a proper approach. They should have involved the stakeholders. They should have given them ample time, because the responsibility of the government is to ensure you improve the welfare of the people. Some of these people, they earn daily. You know, there was a lady I saw who was going to Kikomba, who walked all the way. And the lady said, if this issue was being implemented, they should have put some mechanism in place like the NYS buses. You know, they should have put some mitigating strategies. You cannot just start doing harassment, arresting, public transport all over, and yet you not put an alternative. In the long run, it's the common mwananchi who is suffering. You can imagine walking all the way, the wastage of time, the man hours that you've wasted on the way. And you know, like in Nairobi, which contributes to the GDP of this country almost 60%. I wish an audit can be done so that we can be able to see the loss. We do a cost-benefit analysis. But having analyzed that, I think that was not the best approach. What the government should have done, given that warning, yes, call the stakeholders and be able to give some specific time frame. I'm happy of what PS Kibicho did yesterday, because he made the critical stakeholders, they discuss, and then the issue they had put across. And that's why they called off the strike. You see, the issue of just coming in and you say you're not going to get intimidated by harassing people, arresting people anyhow, it is uncalled of. We must be consultative. We must involve the stakeholders. It must be participatory. Everywhere we are talking about public participation. But I don't think, as far as this is concerned, they must have not involved the critical stakeholders, and they should have given them some time frame that is realistic. You can imagine the issue of coming up to say, of course, you have to do the yellow line. Right. That is one. You have to put the speed governors. They must be in uniform. And speed governors, they must also be in uniform, and the issue of safety belts. With this financial crisis, I don't think you have money to implement this maybe within a week or so. They should have given them time frame at least.
Dr. Wamalwa, despite the fact that these are rules, they had not been suspended, they were enforced, but just the enforcement
absolutely
had gone down.
That's true, but you know, when there was laxity, you know, after Michuki died, he went with the rules, and everything died with him. So this is just something that has been reintroduced.
Right.
It was not sustainable, particularly at that time. But if the enforcement was there, obviously we would not have had this problem. There was a lot of laxity. So to me, they are reintroducing. And that's why there was this issue of giving us some time frame. You know, Matatu industry, with its nature, you must be critical and follow up in terms of implementation. It's a rock business. Okay. So the moment you relax a bit, they go back.
Okay, and shortly we'll be playing a clip of what the Cabinet Secretary for Interior had to say yesterday as we analyze who is who in this particular implementation of the quote-unquote Michuki rules. But of course, on the dailies, on page 4 of the Daily Nation, you'll see that give drivers permanent jobs, says Atoli. Of course, this is in accordance with those rules that indicated that a driver must have a monthly salary so as to avoid the situations that you find of drivers being given quote-unquote escorts to different parts of the city or even the country. Let's listen into what the Cabinet Secretary for Interior had to say yesterday.
Mail people, you are licensed to do a business, and if you are doing business on the basis of blackmail, you cannot continue doing business, and it's time to actually relook at all those licenses all over again. We must go back to an orderly way of life, and that is going to be our way of life. We are not doing this campaign for a month or for 2 months or what have you. It's a total return. It will not happen again. We are determined to be in this for the whole hog, and we are not relenting. So those who are saying, oh, we are withdrawing transport, so we can negotiate, they can keep their vehicles at home as long as they please.
Cabinet Secretary for Interior, and I know he's in charge of the interior affairs. The police department is, rather the National Police Service is under him. But I'm just lost at the point of implementation of these particular rules. This is purely a traffic affair. And even though the police officers are from the interior, they can take instructions from the Inspector General. Who is doing whose job here, and where are we?
Okay, I think the way to contextualize this is that the Transport Ministry, and I know we were looking at it against the background of Michuki. Michuki, then the Minister for Transport, took the role now that Matiang'i is taking. And he was able to do that very effectively. He was very firm. I don't know whether it is about the demeanor of the current minister, but let's allow him the latitude that there is this inter-ministerial cooperation where the Transport Ministry has sat with Interior and said, we have set the policy, these are the regulations, they were in place, we now want to bring them back. But then the Interior, the Transport Minister on his own cannot be able to enforce this unless he has the backing and the force of the Interior Ministry. So, but it would have been good also.
The Interior Ministry or the police?
Well, you see, the Interior Ministry, the police is under the Interior Ministry. So the Defense Forces, the police, the NYS, they're all under the NINI. So a question of who should be the public face really is a matter we should leave to the internal workings of government and the style of every minister. They cannot all be the same. I think where I find a little loose link in the chain is that if we personalize this on the personality, on benchmark it on the persona of Matiang'i, because he seems to be saying we are in for the long haul, but that's Matiang'i speaking. What if we thought about this in terms of changing the culture? Because I think the rules and the regulations are there. Really, I don't think they have changed much. But the culture is what is lacking. We don't have those ethos ourselves, those systems and values within ourselves that certain sanity needs to and decorum in our industry, the public transport, the do's, the don'ts, the things that we cannot do ourselves. If you leave alone this, just think about the amount of things we do in our cars. I saw yesterday, in terms of the penalties, they said now if you put your part of your body outside the car, and it sounds just we look at the way sometimes and driving and putting your hand, now it's an offense. Yeah. But a lot happens more than that. On a Sunday, just look at families, not even people from Macharia or low-income people. People driving big cars like Chris Wamalwa here. They have kids in the car, they've eaten ice cream and they had snacks, and they open the windows and they throw. Yeah. It's about the culture change. We need to change culture and attitudes so that unless that is touched, and Matiang'i and the transport minister and somebody else has a consistent way of having some civic education in days where we just remind ourselves that these are our values and we speak about them, then I think it will be focused on Matiang'i, and when Matiang'i moves, the thing will collapse again.
So, Dr. Chris, the Cabinet Secretary for Interior has been very vocal. At every ministry he has been to, very vocal. Even now that he's at the Interior, you just saw him there with the situation of the examinations. That's a ministry that has been before. I remember that on the 15th of December 2017, if I get that correctly, there was a series of accidents that had happened in this country, and there was called a press conference between the Interior Ministry and the Transport Ministry. There's a time that a team of ministers, the Interior CS, the Transport CS, and the Tourism CS, Najib Balala, had gone to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport to sort of look at things, how they are doing. And so I know that he says that that is the workings of the government, but does it sort of reflect poorly on the performance of the other ministers, or is this just the face of it in the public and more is happening behind the scenes?
I think this is more of the leadership style. When you look at Matiang'i, and I've really been following him, Matiang'i is one guy, his leadership of style is a hands-on person. You remember the very time he was, even he was in under Minister of Education, he could find himself on a parade somewhere without even notice. So his kind of leadership, he wants to lead from the front as others follow. He wants to go down, He's not just a guy who sits at the policy level. He wants to go down even to the implementation level. So unlike the current CS Transport, of course, policies are there, and the Minister of Transport is there to put policy guidelines, the regulations are already there. So the issue here is when it comes to implementation. And of course, when it comes to implementation, a lot of that is being enforced through the Interior, because police is the one in this country that is there to maintain law and order and issues of enforcement. That's why you find it cuts across. When you go to the Minister of Education now, when it comes to exams, to avoid cheating, arrests and whatever going on, it's the police, which is the Minister of Interior. When you go to transport, the policy guidelines are there, and CS Macharia doesn't have a police force to enforce this. The traffic police are the ones to implement or to enforce the traffic rules. So what happens when it comes to implementation? You have to go to the traffic police, and traffic police is under the Interior. So the nature of the Interior Ministry, and that's why in terms of rating, and it's many jurisdictions, all the ministers of Interior, they are rated higher because it cuts across the other ministries. Even when it comes to issues of devolution, whether it's water, when it comes to enforcement, you must use the police. So what Matiang'i is doing, and looking at his kind of leadership style, being a hands-on person, that's why you can see his across the board, you can see the energy, the enthusiasm, the passion he has, and that's why you could see the difference. But that does not mean when you have that kind of style of leadership, you are a better leader than others. You see, for instance, Amina Mohammed, the CS Education, the approach is diplomatic. And that's why you've seen it working very well. We have minimized strikes in the Ministry of Education. So the leadership style depends on circumstances, but does not necessarily mean that this kind of leadership is the best across the board. It depends with the situation. But now when it comes to the Matatu industry and looking at the way it is, actually the approach should be the Matiang'i to handle this and the Michuki kind of leadership.
All right, and we want to move away from that, just hoping that as the crackdown continues, there will be a lasting solution so that there's order in the public transport system.